Imagine for a moment that Texas was already a self-governing independent nation, like almost 200 around the world right now. And we were to ask ourselves if we wanted to join the Union. Knowing everything we know about the federal government right now, would we vote to give up that control and join the Union? Well, if we wouldn't vote to join, then why would we ever tolerate staying one moment longer than we had to?
Welcome to Texas Insider. I'm your host, Larrison Manygoats. Today we have a special guest, Daniel Miller, president of the Texas Nationalist Movement, TEXIT. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Can you tell us about your story from the beginning?
I started on the path toward working for Texas independence back in August of 1996. But all of that work culminated in about a 2-year study prior to 2005 to explore how legitimately we could make Texas a self-governing independent nation. That led to the formation of the Texas Nationalist Movement in 2005. The first thing we had to focus on, obviously, is the support of Texans, right? I mean, that's the primary focus for anything else, whether we're looking outwardly or anywhere else. And effectively for us, we've seen that number of Texans grow every single solitary year. You know, there was a 2009 poll that showed about 35% of Texans supported it. There was a 2014 Reuters Ipsos poll that showed for the first time that we were bumping a majority, but it was the first time we also crossed into majority territory for Republican voters at 54%. But the real bombshell was last summer when Survey USA, which was ranked the number one most accurate pollster in the United States, released this bombshell survey that showed that 60% of overall Texas voters and 66% of likely voters support Texas becoming an independent nation. So pretty much where we're at right now is we're not looking to convince, we're looking for the convinced so that we can force the legislature to give Texans a vote on this issue and formally begin the process of becoming independent.
So the Texas National Movement, how many members do they have?
Yeah, so here's the interesting part. We keep a counter on the main page of the website all the time. So we're just shy under 500,000 registered supporters right now. And the thing that's astonishing about that, one of the reasons we did that was in the very beginning of founding the organization. One of the biggest, I guess you'd call it slurs from the opposition was that no one believes in this. No one believes that Texas should become an independent nation. So it's like, okay, well, we'll show you how this works. And so we just started putting a counter on the website to show how many people come in and literally register their support to see Texas become a self-governing independent nation.
How did you become a president of the Texas National Movement?
Well, as one of the founders, I was there at the very beginning. It was effectively the brainchild of myself and 5 other people who were really tired of, I guess, sort of struggling in the wilderness with this issue. We looked around the world, and I'll tell you one of the statistics, one of the ones that motivated me back in 1996 and really motivated the formation of the TNM. There was the statistic that we had read back in the mid-'90s in a book called Global Paradox by John Nesbitt. He had written really a book about the telecommunications revolution, but the paradox that he cited was that the world's trends point overwhelmingly toward political independence on one hand and economic interdependence on the other. And the statistic that he cited was at the end of World War II, there were roughly 54 recognized fully sovereign countries around the world, nation states. And by the time of the book's publication in the mid-'90s, there were 192. So those countries didn't fall from space. The earth didn't get any bigger. They were people who wanted to reclaim their right of self-government. And so, we looked at that and said, okay, look, if that can happen, if you could see this explosion of nation states, self-government around the world, how can we make that happen right here in Texas?
So why do you think it's so necessary for Texas to succeed?
Well, look, I couch it this way. I mean, we could talk about any number of issues that people have here in Texas. But it really boils down to the idea of self-government. And I'll tell you how we talk to Texans about this issue. And we just ask them a simple question. We say, look, spin a globe, put your finger on any landmass, and understand those people have the right of self-government. So imagine for a moment that Texas was already a self-governing independent nation, like almost 200 around the world right now. And instead of talking about Texas leaving the Union, we were talking about whether or not Texas should join the Union, right?
Yeah.
If Texas was already a self-governing independent nation and we had control over our own border and immigration policy, our own economic policy and our own currency and our own tax policy and our own national defense and our own military, the things that all of those other countries have, and we were to ask ourselves if we wanted to join the Union, knowing everything we know about the federal government right now, would we vote to give up that control and join the Union? Well, if we wouldn't vote to join, then why would we ever tolerate staying one moment longer than we had to?
If succeeded, could you tell us how Texan can be independent? Like you were talking about precious metals and dollar printed in the currency. Will Texas print their own money, bring their own precious metals to the front to run Texas as a country?
Well, the interesting part about it is Texas is already doing that, moving that direction, right? We had several years ago the formation of something called the Texas Gold Depository. That was a move toward economic independence. We already have our own 3-branch military called the Texas Military Department. I mean, we're already moving that direction. Look around the world at all these other self-governing independent nations and understand if they figured it out, so can we. We're currently the 9th largest economy in the world. During the Obama administration, I think 7 out of 8 years, we were the only state that was a net job creator. We're number 1 out of all the states for manufactured exports. We're the number 1 global import hub. It wasn't too long ago that the Port of Laredo outpaced the Port of Los Angeles for imports and trade. We have energy, we have agriculture, we have technology, we have manufacturing, we have infrastructure, we have the workforce. We have everything we need to be a global economic independent powerhouse except for one thing, and that is our independence from a federal government who is intent on destroying all of those things. All Texans have a sense that the federal government, to a degree, is negatively impacting their lives by stripping away our rights, subverting a constitutional republic, those things. But from an economic perspective, a lot of people don't know the fine details. And one of those came in 2 separate studies. One was out of George Mason University, where they studied the effect of something called federal regulatory accumulation. Okay, it's very economically wonkish, but here's the high points. What they showed is that federal regulatory accumulation, aka the federal government's desire to regulate something, and instead of repealing a regulation and replacing it, they just lay new regulations on top of it. So it has effectively year on year a compounding effect. That effect is an annual 2% compression of GDP. When you they ran the numbers and they said, look, when you remove federal regulatory accumulation from the picture, it means that everyone essentially gets about a 600% increase in their take-home pay, right? That means that the federal system, just our participation in that system, is robbing Texans of about 85% of our take-home ability. And there were 2 things that additionally that they showed us. Number 1 is that it negatively impacts, it's regressive, it negatively impacts those that are at or below the poverty line. And second is that Texas is disproportionately affected by that. So those numbers, in fact, could be even more than what came out as the averages of the states overall.
What do you see as the biggest challenges for Texas to happen?
It's a great question. There are really, I think, 2 key sort of bottlenecks on the Texas process. First off, I think everybody needs to understand when people look at TEXIT, they look at it from the standpoint of perhaps the referendum or the final day when we have our independence. But TEXIT is not an act, it's a process. And that process began when we founded our organization and began a legitimate political advocacy movement to make it happen. It will culminate in a major milestone, which would be a referendum on the issue. But at the end of it is independence at the end of that road. So the two bottlenecks, one is really about the Texas people themselves, and the second is about the process in getting to there. Number one, when it comes to the people, it's a self-confidence issue, right? We have been inundated with so much propaganda from the opposition saying that it's impossible, it's unconstitutional, we would never make it all of those things are false and easily dispelled. And so it becomes almost an issue of national self-confidence. The second is process. And the political process, all roads toward a referendum on Texas independence, all of those roads lead right through the Texas legislature. While we have the right specified in the Texas Constitution in Article 1, Section 2, we don't have the legislation to actually hold the vote. And so one of the reasons that the last two sessions of the legislature was filed the Texas Independence Referendum Act that would effectively give Texans a vote on the issue and ask them at the ballot, should the state of Texas reassert its status as an independent nation?
Manufacturers. Do you think more manufacturers will come to Texas? And do you think the manufacturers will get bigger if Texas succeeds?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you go back to the question about, the discussion about federal regulatory accumulation. One of the reasons that Texas has, more Fortune 500 companies are moving their headquarters here is because Texas is good for business in spite of everything that the federal government does. And it really is a difference in philosophy. The federal government, let's be honest, their approach to the economy is more akin to the Soviet Union than it is something that the founders envisioned. They believe in central planning and economic manipulation. They do everything they can to erode and undermine a free market, whereas Texas is very different. We don't have a communist approach to the economy. We believe that people prosper when there is opportunity. And when the government steps in and creates higher barriers to that opportunity, then prosperity suffers. And so that's why you don't see Texas having a state income tax. You don't see corporate income tax. Texas has a bit of a thing called a franchise tax, but the barrier for that is kind of high, until you start getting into larger corporations. But even with that, you still got major corporations moving manufacturing and headquarters here to Texas because Texas is the place where companies come to do business.
Do you think Texas will completely turn its whole country into a border wall?
It's funny. I had an interview with a reporter from the New York Times once, and he asked if Texas was going to put troops on the Rio Grande or put troops on the river. That's how he phrased it. And we said, we'll probably put them on the Red River and the Sabine River. It's kind of a joke, but the point here is it's not really about that, right? I don't think we're going to have a wall around Texas. That's not how it works. But one thing that Texans have been very clear about is they want a secure border and they want a sensible and sane immigration policy. Neither of which the federal government seems willing to provide. So I will tell you what I do foresee. I do foresee that Texas will join the rest of the world in the 21st century when it comes to the borders and immigration. I imagine we will have a trade and travel deal with the United States. I believe that we will wind up seeing, much like the relationship the United States has with Mexico and Canada for travel between, or something maybe even like the Schengen zone in the European Union. But ultimately, I think the net result of this, of Texas becoming independent, is going to be the fact that other states are going to be looking at this as well. Right now, they're looking to Texas for leadership. They're looking to Texas for leadership on a whole host of issues. Texas becomes an independent, self-governing nation. I fully expect other states to begin to have this discussion and to give their citizens a vote on the issue.
If Texas, if the world is looking at it and the United States is looking at Texas, agriculture will be one of the biggest things.
Yeah, I will tell you, our farmers and ranchers are some of the folks that are getting crushed the most. I mean, you look at the economic sectors of Texas. I mean, the three pillars, agriculture, energy, and obviously technology at this point. And I will tell you, two of those three pillars are under direct attack by the federal government all the time. With energy, it's obviously this push toward the Green New Deal and some of this climate madness. But agriculture is also affected by that as well. Where you have subsidies going to corporate farming that are driving small farmers and ranchers out of business. I mean, there's a whole host of supply chain issues that have been problems that have been exacerbated by federal government policy. So our farmers and ranchers are hurting too. Look, the hammer drops on everybody. And when it comes to the federal hammer, it's affecting every single segment of our economy and every member of our populace right now. You take the federal government out of the equation, and you're going to see those pillars protected. You're going to see the free market do its thing, and you're going to see Texans prosper in a way that no one's ever seen, at least in our generation.
There's a trend going on here in Texas. More and more apartments are being built almost in every city, and a lot of changes going on in Austin, Texas. What do you think about this trend?
Yeah, the census numbers really, I think, told us what we already knew, right? Which was Texas is the net recipient of domestic in-migration. People talk an awful lot about sort of the problems that we have at the border with Mexico and mass migration there. But the one thing that Texans have noticed is a lot of people coming in from a lot of other states. Now, Texans have mixed feelings about that, right? But my experience has been that really there are two separate categories of those folks that are coming into Texas. One smaller percentage of that are people that are, they're tech company relocations or corporate headquarter locations. They're bringing in their workforce. That's a small percentage of it. But the vast majority are what we refer to as political, cultural, and economic refugees from other states, right? States like California, where if you have even remotely conservative beliefs or values, you are ostracized. You have no place there. You're being not only priced out of your homes there because of property values and taxes, but you can't have a place for your kids to go to school without being socially engineered with some neo-Marxist philosophy that's coming straight from the California government. And that scenario is playing out in a lot of different places. So a lot of that net migration are people who think like Texans, who vote like Texans, who want to be Texans, and can no longer stomach being in the state that they're in.
What will be the real world benefits for Texas if it does succeed?
They're numerous. I mean, you get to what I mentioned a moment ago about federal regulatory accumulation. That goes away, right? So all of a sudden, Texans now have the opportunity to keep 85% more than they were keeping before. You look at the economic aspect of it and realize that Texas taxpayers overpay anywhere from $103 to $160 billion annually into the federal system. It's money that evaporates from our pockets that we never see again. Texas would be able to set its own border and immigration policy. We'd be able to set our own defense policy to something that probably aligned more with protecting Texas as opposed to forced projection. The fact, though, that Texans would no longer suffocate under 180,000 pages of federal laws, rules, and regulations administered by 2.5 million unelected federal bureaucrats is a benefit. The fact that Texas voters could debate an issue, come up with a solution that fits us without worrying about an unaccountable, unelected federal judge overturning the will of voters at the stroke of a pen. That's a benefit. So you look at this idea of Texas becoming an independent nation, and I'm not saying that everything is upside, right? But what I am saying is that it gives us an opportunity to have a government that is our government, a government that enacts the policies that make sense for Texas and not for 50 other states that don't have to deal with the same challenges in the same way that we do.
Do you think there's a possibility of another civil war if Texas succeeds?
I don't think there's a possibility of a civil war if Texas withdraws from the Union. I believe that there is a possibility of a civil war if people in the states don't start seriously having the conversation about whether or not the federal system continues to suit them. Look, we've seen political tensions higher than ever. People refer to it as polarization, as though there were only two sides to it. But it's not. Look, the United States is fragmenting. It's, suffocating under $34 trillion worth of federal debt, ineptitude at the federal level. There are all these reasons why the federal government is effectively running the United States as a political and economic institution into the ground. And what you have is an example of how authoritarian governments try to keep people together that don't share the same worldview. And I would tell any student of history, go look at what happened to Yugoslavia. The moment that the center collapsed and the strong man that was holding them together left, all of those people said, we don't want to live under the same set of rules. We can be friends, right? That was an option that was on the table, but we don't want to live under the same set. But the problem is they held on too long. And so you had balkanization, you had war, you had violence, you had bloodshed. It's the same thing that happened in Sudan. When you had the predominantly Muslim majority in Sudan that was effectively oppressing the Christian minority, you had civil war. You had 30 years of civil war with millions of casualties. But the solution to that, what brought peace and stopped the war, was an acknowledgement that they didn't have to live under the same governmental system. And so you had Sudan split into Sudan and South Sudan. In fact, this is the 21st century, not the 19th. And as such, we have this history where we can see around the world where independence has been the thing that maintained the peace versus, the thing that exacerbates and starts civil wars. Just an acknowledgement of the right of self-government and self-determination is enough to head off any of that Civil War talk at the past. But the challenge is, this is my warning to everyone, is that this is a conversation that has to happen now, not after things boil over and the sides are at each other's throats. The conversation has to happen now. We need to have some adult conversations about whether or not we should be in an absolute political and economic union together anymore. That might make sense for some states to stay in that sort of political or economic union, but not all states should.
This conversation you speak of, who are we supposed to have a conversation with?
Well, you go back to what the nature of the union is, right? What is the United States? The United States is not a nation. Okay? It's not this monolithic nation. You go back to what the Constitution says. You go back to what the founders envisioned, right? Each of the states was its own independent sovereign entity. And if you want to tip off on that, go read the language in the Declaration of Independence, where they declared themselves as 13 independent states. And they go throughout the document referring to Great Britain as the state of Great Britain to essentially show they may be leaving together, and they may be working together to get their independence, but they're not in this absolute political and economic union. Okay, so that's what the founders envisioned for the United States, that you would have these 50 individual, independent, self-governing states that effectively delegated certain powers to the body as a whole. And so what do you see? It's essentially an economic union, a mutual defense pact, a bit of a currency union, but beyond that, that's all the federal government was really supposed to handle. And they had a common diplomatic policy, right? Common foreign relations. But beyond that, the federal government has grown so large that it's tried to consume way more than it was intended to do. So for us to have this conversation, we have to remember, contrary to what Marjorie Taylor Greene said about this national divorce of Republicans and Democrats or any of that, this is not, the United States is not a union of political parties. It is a union of 50 states. And so each single state needs to have this conversation about whether or not their interests are best suited by remaining in a political and economic union that really doesn't care anything about the concerns or challenges that their citizens face. That's the conversation they need to have.
Yes, sir. Who do you think will come and be part of Texas? Which state, and if Mexico, do you think the possibility that they'll join Texas and become part of the country of Texas if it succeeds?
Yeah, here's the great part about it. There's not really a need for them to do that, right? Because Texas is already a sovereign state, just like Oklahoma, just like Louisiana, right? Or just like the northern states of Mexico, right? And so the other side of this, and it goes back to what I said a moment ago, I mean, this is the 21st century, not the 19th century, right? The idea that somehow self-governing independent nations have to be in another absolute political and economic union to be able to do business with one another, to travel between one another, it's just frankly wrong. Because you look at around the world, 200 other self-governing independent nations, they're able to trade with one another. They're able to set up travel agreements with one another. They engage in mutual defense compacts like NATO. You have free trade zones. You have embassies and passports in all these different places. You have all of the things that the founders actually originally envisioned for the Union. But the big difference is that none of those countries have to bend a knee to a capital full of people that they didn't elect, forcing policies on them that they don't want. They do it by treaty or they do it by agreement. The fact that we've got to go back and look at these things, let's try to reform the Union again. We don't need to do those things. We can be friends. We can agree to defend one another. We can agree to trade with one another. We can set up common travel. We can do all those things. And we can let California govern California. We can let New York govern New York. We can let the rest of the states in the world or in the United States govern themselves. And we can let Texas govern Texas. And what goes for them, that's their business. What goes for us is our business. And nobody can override the will of the people of Texas.
Traditions, principles, and how everyday life used to be, people believing in God. Is that one of the reasons why Texas has been here for so long?
Texas is very unique. Every one of them is very unique in how they operate. Look, Texans have a fiercely independent streak. But I go back to the words of Sam Houston. He says, I humble myself before God, and there the list ends. I think that might be the best encapsulation of sort of the Texas mindset that you could ever find. We are fiercely independent people, but we are effectively bound together by faith, not necessarily the common faith, but by faith. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. So, look, Texans have that streak that runs through them, and it's made us resilient. That same spirit that existed when Texans hoisted that white flag with the cannon and the black star that said, come and take it, that is the same defiant spirit that we have here now. And I think ultimately it's that same spirit that's going to lead us to independence.
Right. Communism and the theory of socialism, how much has it affected Texas?
The federal system is the biggest promulgator of communism and neo-Marxism. I mean, socialist or communist philosophy, I mentioned the fact that their economic policies out of D.C. look more like the Soviet Union than what the founders envisioned, than a free market. Or you look at the fact that the federal government, via redistributed dollars, effectively forces cultural change in our public school systems, right? Where they're trying to indoctrinate kids in what is arguably, again, neo-Marxist philosophy. Absolutely. You want to know where the communist threat comes from. It comes riding in the Trojan horse of our relationship with the federal government. I think it's important for people to understand that the process of TEXIT is well underway. And at this juncture, we could talk about the pros and cons all we want to, but it really boils down to one single thing, and that is, do the people of Texas even have the right to vote on it? Look, Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution says that all political power is inherent in the people, and it says that the people have at all times the inalienable right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in such manner as they may think expedient. Our Constitution lists that as an inalienable right, right? That means it's on par with the right to keep and bear arms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. So at a minimum, Texans should have the ability to vote on this issue. And that's part of the really the next stage for us. We are working to give Texans a vote on it, even the ones that don't want Texas to happen. We want the people of Texas to be heard on their right of self-government. Let the people of Texas choose. At the end of the day, I'm either right or wrong, but there's only one way to find out, and that is to put it to a vote.
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for watching Texas Insider. Have a great day.